Hello and welcome to Guider and welcome to this podcast meets masterclass. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking with someone exactly the other side of the world from myself. It's Michael Walk from Sydney, Australia, and the name of the company is Trimline. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hey, Robert. Very well. Very well. Thanks for having me.
That's an absolute pleasure. Now, this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So we're going to take a conversation route to this rather than slides and decks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But we have someone with us today who knows her onions, as we say. Michael, it's probably best for you to introduce yourself, who you work with, and a touch on the report, and then we can get into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a fractional CFO and I specialize in helping indie agencies. So obviously not owned by a group holding company. And what I do is plug in and help them think about the future, help them get more profitable, and help them work out how to beat that valley of death and grow from 1 million up to that $10 million mark, and do that through practical things like forecasting, hiring plans, getting into the margins and working out, keeping on top of cash flow, all those kind of forward-facing accountant things rather than the backward-facing accountant things like is your tax return done, and all that stuff bores me to death. So I love talking strategy and helping businesses grow.
So straight away, 80% of people have turned off because they heard the word accountant. But before they actually turn off. So personally, I love my accountant. I think my accountant's the most important service, 999 service that I have around. But can you just explain to me why you think the accountant is so important? I know you're going to be slightly biased, but also why is it that so many agency folk kind of skip the finance bit? It's kind of like, oh, look, let's do some more stuff with AI. You could look at your accounts. Well, maybe I should get AI to do that.
Yeah.
You could look at your account. So why is the accountant so important? But more importantly, why is it that agency folk seem to look the other way so often?
It's not just agency folk, it's businesses in general. Often people have a block when it comes to money and numbers. They may have told themselves, I'm not good at numbers, or they just find it boring. So they put their head in the sand. So, the past 10 years, I've been helping small businesses, and I'm trying to make it not boring, try and make it exciting. And who doesn't want more cash in their bank account? That, at the end of the day, is what we're trying to do for people, which I think is exciting because it gives you options in life. I think the negative rep is valid because there's a lot of tax accountants, the normal compliance, is your VAT done, all that kind of stuff, that are terrible. They can't talk to people. They probably were introverts, and they do give the name accountant a terrible rep. So I fully understand why that is. That's why I'm a CFO. But that just means I can read a balance sheet and a P&L and tell people what's happening in their business. I see myself more as part of their management team, and just like any other person in the management team, having ideas about how to grow it and that kind of stuff. So I think that's why there's the negative rep, because there is a lot of dud accountants out there. But as you've mentioned, Robert, once you find a good one, they're worth their weight in gold.
And I think part of the problem is, whether it's a CFO function, or whether it's the accountant function, whether it's the formal bit, which we all know you can get done in Bangalore for $5 an hour, or whether it's the advice piece.
Yeah.
There's a sense that straight away that word they don't understand us. They don't understand the unique challenges that we're under that no other business faces. Now, I know a friend who runs a butcher's shop, and he has absolutely unique challenges that no one else understands. Who runs a sports shop. He has a unique challenges which no one else understands, and doesn't matter how many times I say it's a black box. You put stuff in, and you do stuff to it, and stuff comes out. And if you get it right, you put £1 in and you get £2 out. And if you get it wrong and you put £1 in, you get minus £1 coming out there.
Yeah, that is it.
But what does the specialization piece do? How does that improve the quality of how you work with someone? I mean, would it? What I'm asking you really is to give me a bit of an praise of niches thing, because you could just say, I'm going to work with any, I hate the phrase B2B, but any business to business, or I'm going to work with anyone, or anyone with less than 30 people, or anyone within 5 miles of where I live.
Yeah.
So why that focus, and how does that focus mean that you're, not that it should be promotional, but why does it mean that you're better at doing your job than someone's a generalist?
Yeah, I think the main upside is that I've gone deeper on the key recurring problems that most agency owners focus on and kind of come up against. So I built tools in the toolkit and seen those problems before. So it's not having to reinvent the wheel every time something goes wrong. I'm like, yes, I've dealt with that. This is how the good people deal with it. And I can share my knowledge across agencies of what the good people are doing, what other people are struggling with. And that breadth of experience and knowledge across a wide variety of people in the same game, maybe with a different discipline. Some might be doing paid, some might be full service, some might be doing just SEO. But having that breadth of knowledge and seeing those problems pop up again and again just means that I can go deeper quicker with people. And I speak their language. I know what the hell they're talking about. I know how to deal with media spend if they're having to manage that through their business. So it just makes everything smoother. And I honestly niche because I just enjoyed working with agency owners. I worked in the film game for a while and always enjoyed working with more creative people, with more relaxed people, and that suits who I am. So it was kind of a selfish play of why I did it, because I actually enjoy working with the people. And it's worked out really well because it's also dealing with a lot of human problems. Like, agencies are service-based businesses. So a lot of it is like, team, how do you get them firing on all cylinders? And how do we get this group of humans engaged and like wanting to succeed? Which I find those problems are endless and they're fascinating. Whereas product-based businesses, I've got a couple clients in the portfolio, but their own legacy clients that I've loved and kept forever. 95% of mine are agencies. And products businesses, it's just return on ad spend, inventory problems. It's kind of not as interesting to me as those human-based problems. So that's a little summary as, I guess, why I've gone into agency land, and also I think the benefits of it. And you'll see that, I guess, when we chat about the report of like the problems I regularly see and what pop up, and I think about them a lot more deeply.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the report, because I'm sure, like myself, you get 5 minutes into the conversation with someone about, I work with agencies, and they go, oh, that's interesting. And the first question is, how's everyone else finding it out there right now? Which is a kind of that's the fishing question, like just where am I and what's going on?
Yeah.
We have a little conversation about the state of the nation.
Yeah.
And then eventually they'll go, and just out of interest, profitability. What's the profitability people are getting at the moment? And tell me, revenue per head. What do you reckon for healthy revenue per head per employee? Utilisation. I've heard some numbers. And is it right that I can exit my business for 12 or 15 times value?
Yeah.
So let me just declare my position on this.
Okay.
I'm not a great fan on benchmarks,
okay.
And I'll tell you why. It's not that I'm not a fan of data. I think data is really, really valuable. My concern about benchmarks is, if I'm in growth mode because I want to sell the business in 5 years' time, the sort of things I'm going to be measuring on and the sort of things that I'm going to be more than happy to have happening are going to be very different if I'm selling right now, or if it's pure lifestyle business and all I want to do is take $100,000 out of the business each year, and I've got there.
Yeah.
So I'm nervous. I'm nervous that we're not measuring apples with apples often.
Yeah.
And likewise, we have different parts of the world, or different parts of the country, or different niches. If you're selling only employers, you can have this different opportunities from if you're selling into fintech and so on and so forth. Having said that, it is really useful to get a bit of a sense of what other people in the room are doing. So all my point is simply, when people come to me and say, oh, I was told the benchmark fees per head were, and you go, well, where did the data come from? Was it self-reported? In which case, did it come from the government? In which case, it may not be accurate. We just need to just think about what you're trying to do and understand what other people saying or say they're doing, and then let's make a match. That's my little government health warning. I'm not sure where you sit on this.
I fully understand your point, for sure, that you need to be very wary of what you choose. Often in those situations, everyone does have a slightly different business model. Some have a huge amount of offshore staff, some are all local, some are priced completely differently. But as a starting point, like when I start working with someone, we just work out where they're at right now and try and improve that trend line. So the starting point absolutely gives us a rough guide, but it's more like, which way are we trending and which way have you been trending over the last 12 months? And that's where benchmarks can be useful, is like, where is the movement? And then no matter where they are, it's then just like, what levers can we pull to improve it? So definitely take all this with a grain of salt. And this might be interesting for your audience, obviously, who are based a little bit more in Europe, is that this is Aussie agencies from down under. And I'll be interested to hear from you as I rattle through some of the key, like super high level. I'll just cover like the high touch points, if you see this from like your experience as well. So like the high level touch points, without getting too nerdy, is that everyone wasn't profitable enough. Surprise, surprise. So 37% of people were less than 10% net profit, or were between 0 and 10% net profit, which for me, that was a huge number. That's kind of danger territory for me, being that unprofitable. The charge out rates were okay for Australian standards. They were 150 Aussie to 200 Aussie, which I think if we run some FX in, let's quickly do 200 AUD to pound. Is that the best, or to euro?
Pound, £2.
Yeah, 95 pound charge out rate. That was the kind of rough average of people here. But, and also utilization was about where you would expect it for a company wide, which is 70%. That was the average, but there was a little bit of nuance in that utilization data. But this is the interesting thing that I picked up from the report. And this is what I picked up from my experience too, is that staff are actually lying to the founders. And if they're actually tracking time, so 58% of respondents were tracking time. So the other people, we have no idea. So there wasn't enough people tracking time, in my opinion. Yeah. But of those 58% of respondents who were, they were hitting the benchmark perfectly. And I've seen this time and time again, where I come in, you're less than 10% net profit, utilization looks good, and the time data, no one trusts. And there's a culture of tell the boss what they want to hear, not what's actually happening. And I think that's probably a huge part of why there's a industry-wide over-servicing challenge. And that's a huge driver of why it's 10% net profit. But everyone here in Australia was still thinking about growth, thinking about sales, thinking about hiring. But the true engine room of the business was broken. And that was the key insight that we took away, is that people need to be focusing more on the boring stuff, on like internal operations, having good systems for delivering efficiency. And most importantly, like the clients, my like A grade clients, the best ones in my portfolio, they are religious about spotting scope, being on top of scope, upselling if they need to, having those tricky conversations, or having a productized way to upsell people into an extra pack if they need a top up for certain things. If there's, especially deeper projects, like SEO, there can be a piece of string if you need to dive in and do a lot more dev work. So having clear ways to be able to upsell that and not having to swallow all that time themselves. So that was probably the most interesting insights that might be applicable on your side of the world. Tell me, Robert, have you seen any of these things? Is it ringing a bell for you?
Lots of bells. So I've written about, a dozen articles and virtually a book, which is something along the lines of in praise of the dull, boring stuff.
Oh, really?
And it's nearly always the final slide, in praise of the dull, boring stuff.
Yeah.
Because people just love doing the sexy stuff. They love doing the interesting stuff. They love,
Yeah.
checking out a bit of sexy something or other on AI,
Yeah.
as opposed to getting a spreadsheet out and actually crunching the numbers and just looking at what the margins are and figuring out where the problems are. So I 100% agree with you. I mean, I'm the same with you. So revenues, I would be in the UK. I am concerned if businesses are doing less average blended hourly rates.
Yep.
So
Yep.
the number of hours we sell divided by the number of hours we sorry, the revenue divided by the number of hours we've sold. So average blended rate. I'm concerned with businesses which are doing less than £100.
Okay.
Now, Central Europe, if it's Central East Europe, I'd be concerned if they're doing less than £50 or £60.
Yeah,
But
okay.
for UK, Northern Europe, Germany, Netherlands and Belgium, so on, anything less than £100 an hour is starting to make me nervous.
Yeah.
Most high performers that we work with, we've got to differentiate, and also, I'm only looking at a slice of a particular cake.
Yep.
Most of that, what we call high performers that we work with, are doing north of 140, £150 an hour, which therefore enables them to have more. I mean, we're not leaving out cost of living in this example, but it leaves more headway.
Yeah, wow. So that's north of 300 Australian, which is elite. Like, we had some people charging above 250 Australian, which is about that range, but 9% people were. So it wasn't.
And that's why we outsource stuff to Australian agencies. So there's a kind of
there's an arbitrage there.
Outsourced to Central East Europe.
Yeah.
Outsourced to Asia or South Africa.
Yeah. And
Australia's kind of the last port of call, partly because of the time difference, but then you've got the language culture, which actually helps. So that's first number. The utilization thing is slightly more complicated here because there are two definitions of utilization. No one's agreed about what utilization is. So utilization model number one is Fred works 35 hours. They spend 10 hours doing admin and meetings. They therefore have 25 hours left.
Yep.
And then they work, say, 20 hours. And people would say that's 20 of 35, and whatever that number is, 55% is what utilization is. Other people will say Fred works 35 hours a week. He's got 10 hours of meetings. Therefore, Fred's only got 25 hours of billable time available. 20 hours is a utilization rate of 4/5, which is 80% of billable time is charged. So we've got two definitions going on. It's a bit like when people talk about EBITDA. Everyone has a different one for some reason. I know it's not physically possible because there's only one truth. But everyone in the UK has a different model where they add back in the membership of the sports club, and then they take that out their wife, and then they add back in the third car, and then their guitar collection.
Lots of grey area items.
And so the whole point of EBITDA, interest tax dividends, is that it's a neutral, legally independent piece that I can compare agencies, becomes a bit miffed. But on utilization, on the standard definition of utilization, 70-75%. The issue is, what we don't want is, we don't want people burning out. And if people are getting about 85-90% of their available billable time, so that they're working, then they break. So that's the utilization piece. And then profitability. We used to say 10% is the new break even. We now say 15% is the new break even. In other words, if you do 10% or less, there's red flags. And even now, 15% or less, there's red flags, because it's the need to invest so much in other things. I would say that last year, most independent agencies that we work with and that we've reached out to, most, 80% of them, are doing less than 10%.
Yep.
And then we've got these outliers in Greece, in Croatia, in Poland actually, that are doing like 40-50% because they've got stupidly low wage levels, like
Yeah.
$8 an hour, and they're selling direct into the UK at 120, 130 an hour, and they are and they have no office. It's all,
Yeah.
so
And that labour arbitrage is definitely common here in Australia as well. Often the Philippines is the main area where people will try and have those offshore teams and build that cheaper base. But I've seen, honestly, mixed reviews with the quality of that work. Some people find some A players and it's awesome and they have clear systems and it works. But I've also seen the negative stories where they build a massive team over there, but it's just the quality's not there and staff, like client churn picks up and it's all a bit of a mess. So it's kind of very role specific and business specific. I haven't seen that work across the board. It very, very much depends on who you find there.
Yeah, and then with north of £100 an hour, then you can reckon that you should be able to get revenue per FTE or revenue per fee earner north of 100,000. And now someone says, hello, I've got a 10-person agency, I'm turning over 800K. Straight away you go, oh, that doesn't, if they were good, they'd be doing $1 million, but they're doing 800. So there's room for growth. And then the number that we can then go in on is gross margin. So that's the number that, for us, we're not accountants, but for us it reveals all, so we need to see gross margin north of 50%. If it's not 50%, there's just not enough space to pay for admin and then pay the owner a half decent salary.
Yeah.
You just see it all the time. $1 million turnover, maybe 400,000 left of the, and then of that 300,000 on wages leaves 100K for admin, zero profit at the end of the day. The numbers are really simple, and the numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
So do you look at revenue per head? Is that one of the numbers you look at?
Yeah, absolutely. I graph that for all my clients on a monthly dashboard. I track that over the last 12 months. And kind of similar benchmarks here. Like, let me put it Aussie to GBP again. So, like a good agency here would be doing 200 AUD revenue per full-time employee, which would be about 95 quid. So that would be a good one. But I see lots of people that come to me with a lower number than that for sure. The one problem, as you said at the top, the problem with benchmarks, the one tricky part of that is often teams with big offshore teams. They're still full-time employees. They're still part of the team. But obviously their cost base is like, 25% cheaper. So that kind of throws out our calcs. If someone has a full, Australian team or British, UK team versus someone who's got 60% of the team are offshore with a lower wage base, sometimes it's hard to compare the two because it throws that metric out. Because you can have a huge headcount, but the cost isn't that much.
So let's deal with some of these issues head on. Let's start with profitability. So for you, what does a healthy profit margin look like? And what are the biggest levers?
20%. 20% is always where I'm aiming. My elite agencies, 30% and about plus, but that would be the top of the bell curve. That's not everyone. So that would be the normal one. The number one problem I see, especially with new clients, is that wage costs as a percent of their revenue are too high. People come to me with wage costs are taking up, and I can include, like, if it's a full-time contractor, I'll include that in wage costs just for this calc, right? If it's a full-time team member working with you. Sometimes, like, I've seen people with 70% of their revenue being taken up by team. So there is just no nothing left for overhead, nothing left for profit, because it's all team. So usually when I go hunting margin, I'm always looking at the team, because that is by far the biggest driver of margin in agencies for me. Obviously, we still run the ruler through overhead, making sure that's lean and trim. And then the other place I look is the unit economics of how they're pricing and packaging their stuff, because that's where all the problems are either solved or created. If you've got your unit economics right, and then you're just delivering within those boundaries, then happy days. But often that connection isn't there. Like the founders pricing and quoting often just based on what they think, or how they feel on the day, or the person across the table. And then that's separated from the delivery team. So I often, for people at the start, will be doing like a pricing and margins review to be like, how are you building your quotes? What are your charge out rates? Go into depth there to make sure that makes sense with the team they've got.
So that for me, I mean, that's kind of gold dust, isn't it really? Because it's, you call it unit economics. It's a great phrase. Could you just expand a bit more on how one can analyze pricing and also how you so my middle name, as everyone knows, is Put Your Prices Up. A number of times I say.
That's a long middle name.
It's a long middle name. I know. But my parents were very keen to that name. But it's the maths is blindingly obvious, because the clients you lose, if you put the prices up, the clients you lose are the pond life and scum you hate.
Yeah.
And you can afford to lose clients,
Yeah.
and in that time you can improve the quality of your service and the arithmetic, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The price is down, the reverse happens. You attract the pond life and scum, and you end up working next Monday and Tuesday just to keep in the same place. And this is true. I mean, I've worked in 32 countries, and they always say you don't understand what it's like in Botswana, in Zambia, in South Africa. It's like no. They people say this everywhere. This is the reality. If you put your prices up, you're choking. You're choking the people in some senses, but in an incredibly positive way, because you're working with people who get the value that you add and enjoy what you're doing. Otherwise, it's a race to the bottom. So I'd like to understand your just go a bit more into profitability. You talked about unit economics. You talked about looking at how people price, but I just feel there's more to it than I look at price.
Yeah, absolutely. I was doing this with a newish client literally this week. So very, very simple terms for the listeners at home. I look at, let's imagine one client and there's one team member looking after them, just to break it down to like the simplest possible way. I look at the base cost of what that team member is costing us. Let's assume it's $50 an hour, 50 US an hour, £50 an hour, whatever it needs to be. And my rough rule of thumb and very high level metric, there's a bit more nuance than this, is that we need to be marking them up 3.5 to 4 times what they're costing us as the charge out rate. So if they're costing us $50, their charge out rate should be 200 in order for all of the unit economics of the business to make sense.
And that's their full on cost. So that's their wage plus their phone and their desk and their training and everything.
Yeah, that's budgeting in, some overhead. It's budgeting in some profit margin. Yeah, that's designed to cover everything, as long as.
Just to be clear, when you're saying 3.5 times, which is great, because here we probably say 3.5, not 3.5, 4, but it explains if you've got a lower salary, that's how you end up with your higher revenue per year. You're saying 3.5 to 4 times the dollar rate that they're given, or the dollar rate that they're given and the cost of looking after that desk.
That is just the core cost of what that team member's costing us, all in. So that might include any other additional payroll stuff you need to, here in Australia, it's called superannuation, where we pay for people's retirement. It includes
Yep.
all of those things in that $50. That's the all-in hourly cost for that human to work for us. And then that's not including overhead or anything. And then we
Yep.
apply that, for example, keep the math easy, ×4 markup, to get to the 200 charge out. And that's what their base should be. So that's never the ceiling. It's always, we can't go below this. Otherwise we're going to be eating our margin and we'll be a negative profitability or, a 5% profitability business. And then obviously you've got to keep an eye on the other items in the P&L to make sure the bigger unit economics of the business makes sense. But that's the core of a service business. You're borrowing someone's time, you need to mark it up. That's the rough unit economics that I use for that particular math. But as we spoke about at the top, right, everyone's over-servicing. The team are lying about where their time is going. So that was one of the biggest insights I picked up from doing this is like, we used a market research firm to help us truly spot like different like anomalies in the data. And we're like, look, everyone's charge rate looks all right. That's not groundbreaking. But it was clear that people are telling porcupines, is how we say it in Australia.
So when we're looking at KPIs, key performance indicators, to reveal whether we're underpricing or not, the KPI is that ratio, hourly salary rate to charge out rate.
Yep. So, and we can like the revenue to wage multiple. You can look at a team's total revenue under management and look at the total cost of that team and see what multiple that is. So, you've got 100K in clients being looked after by, the team. You have a look at what that wage cost is of those people, divide the revenue by the wage and see what ratio you get there. Hopefully it's about the same, 4 times or ish. But it's just building in enough space between that core cost and what's coming in to give us that breathing room for the rest of the margin of the business.
And presumably, if you're seeing 4 times there as a ratio, it's no guarantee, but you're expecting to see north of 10% net profit further down.
Yeah, as long as the owner's not being a greedy little pig and got their hand in the cookie jar too much, and that's the other job of a CFO is to make sure we're not getting silly and the rest of overhead's less than 20% of revenue, because obviously some people are very different in their approach to how disciplined they are with those kind of costs. But yes, as long as overhead's not out of control and they don't have some crazy commission structure it's eating into our cost of like a massive cost of sales, then yes, it should that should all roughly work out in the wash.
Okay.
And they're not over-servicing. Because there's no point having that beautiful charge out rate and they're doing double the hours, because then all the math gets thrown out the window.
So we've talked about profitability. We've talked about revenue per head. Cash flow is a real issue. The number of agencies that say, hey, we're profitable. And you go, yeah, but you're going bust. And they go, that can't be possible. And you go, well, you are owed 200,000.
Yeah.
And that big project that you've already done, half off for 100K, you're actually owed that as well. That's 300,000 you're owed. And that. So how do you how do we look at this? Because it's the number one killer of agencies.
Yeah.
Is there a cash runway, a number of months of cash that you look for, or is it the payment terms or the credit control processes? I mean, just talk to me about the cash flow for a bit.
For sure, 2 to 3 months runway is what I aim for my clients, and that's 2 to 3 months of overhead plus team payroll. So if literally revenue went to 0 tomorrow, we've still got enough cash in the war chest to last us 2 to 3 months. Some of my clients are more conservative. They've got 6 months in the bank because that's their sleep at night number, and that's fine.
Yep.
So that's in terms of how much cash runway we want there. In my clients, it's a mixed bag. The agencies that do more project work, cash flow is a much bigger pain. because of the nature of bigger projects, milestone payments, waiting on the client to deliver stuff in order to actually hit that milestone. So they get into this bigger, longer, slower process. But there's a huge, especially in our survey, there was a large amount doing retainer work. And for all my clients, we try and collect ideally in advance, first of the month in advance, or as short as possible payment terms, like if not 14 days, 7 days. That's harder to do in Australia anyway, when my bigger clients who deal with tier one big corporates, big fancy car brands and stuff.
Talk to me about it.
Then we get pushed into accounts payable process, and we have to carry more cash because they treat us like the little fish. And it's one of my absolute soapboxes. I hate how they use agency as a bank, and they're the big corporates with all the line of credits, but we're the ones having to wear their late payments. So it does depend on if you're project or retainer. Retainer is a bit easier too, especially if you can get that auto direct debit going. That's really where I want my clients to be. And even for my clients historically that have got a client at the moment who's historically been more web dev and done a lot of bigger, kind of cool, but project-based work, we're trying to work out how to productize that into a retainer to take that cash flow stress off them, because it can really wear you down, especially because you've got to make payroll every month, every week, but those project payments aren't coming in, every month, every week. So there's a real mismatch in timing. And then, as you mentioned at the top, staying on top of age receivables, always like a hawk. Having a different email address, even if you don't have a accounts department to hassle people from, so it's not your email. And kill them with kindness, but being firm. And like anyone with 2 invoices outstanding, I'm always like, they're on the watch list. Can we pause them? That gets people's attention when you threaten to turn off the tap, because it's just unfair. It's terrible ethics for a business to just not pay their suppliers. I think it's one of my pet peeves.
Cool. So we've done profitability and pricing. We've done revenue per head. We've done cash flow. But there's been an assumption in this conversation of almost like a steady state. So when we think about kind of growth and scale, I guess, for you, there must be some headcount milestones where things change, because a 5-person agency is not like a 50-person agency.
Yeah. And
so I'm intrigued, one, what you see those headcount milestones are, from baby to toddler to infant to young adults. I'm intrigued to know what traps might appear at different times.
Yeah.
And to what extent the financial benchmarks tend to shift. Is the dashboard of a 5-person agency the same as the dashboard of a 50-person agency in terms of what they're looking at?
Yeah, definitely. So I've broken this down in a different lead magnet that I'm not going to spruik, but basically it's, baby would be the 1 mil. And if we use that revenue per, like if we use the revenue per full-time employee of 200K, for example, so let's just do a mil. So that's hitting us at about 5. That would be the baby, right? That's kind of just getting off the ground. The biggest trouble I see is people going from that 1 to the 5. So that's kind of the biggest drop off in terms of valley of death, people not making it. And those are just because they're trying to build a team. They're trying to build a team and need a management layer, and the founder gets stretched. And all of those pricing problems we earlier discussed, they haven't properly addressed. They're over-servicing. They haven't truly got the unit economics right or the scope control right. So they're struggling with cash and profitability, but they can't afford to build the team they need for the founder to get out of the day-to-day and focus on the bigger picture growth. And that for me is the core recurring problem that I see, is the founders always come to me being like, I want to get out of it. Like they're getting burnt out. They're doing sales and managing all the team still, and like they kind of want freedom. So it's on us to plan that org chart of how do we build that management layer as we go. And that for me is the biggest core challenge of people growing to that 5 mil. And then once you're at that 5 mil, getting to 10, my clients who are in that next tier, it becomes about efficiency you kind of start, the bigger the ship, you grow more barnacles, and it's dealing. There's more HR problems that pop up, and those kind of efficiency systems, that kind of stuff pops up a lot more and more in that next range as we grow to 10.
Cool. And do we measure the same stuff all the way through, or do the KPIs change?
They do change slightly, definitely, depending on the data of what the client has. Obviously, if they have time tracking data, we might be looking at utilization all the way through. I'm looking at net profit, absolutely, all the way through. And for different sizes, I think for me, it more depends on what the critical challenge of the business is at the time. For example, if we don't have any cash or enough cash, I'm looking at our cash runway, I'm looking at our age receivables like a hawk. But if that's not a problem, we have built the working capital, then maybe we're looking at other kind of stuff. Revenue per full-time employee, that's a great benchmark for the whole journey as well. But, the bigger you get, you start to look at some slightly fancier ones like key client risk. Are we landing as we move up the totem pole? Sometimes we're targeting bigger fish, but if we land a big one and we only go have one of them, that becomes a risk to the business. And then also the bigger we get, the more the staff stuff seems to pop up. So we're talking about like employee culture, their satisfaction, and making sure that the team aren't churning and we're holding on to the good people. And that becomes more important as it gets bigger and bigger, and the founder's not in the trenches with everyone day to day. They're relying more on like their reports to tell them what's happening. Those are the other ones. But the P&L metrics, they work at $1 million, they work at a $10 million. You still want to, as a percent of revenue, not have your overheads over 20%. You still want to be ideally at 20% net profit. You don't want your team costs taking up more than, 50, 55% of your revenue, ideally. And that stuff is a business in balance from day one through to, that $10 million exit. But as you build the management team, that profit shrinks. That seems to be the key challenge that I see it again and again, is you need that high-paid salesperson, you need that high-paid GM. They don't come cheap, and if you hire a dud, then they leave, and it's a problem, and then you got to find another one. So those are all the things that kind of pop to mind, top of mind. What do you think? I'd love to know your opinion on this question.
I think there's. So we look at, based loosely on the Griner curve, or the work by some guys called Churchill and Lewis. In the States, Churchill and Lewis is in the UK. You get the baby, which is getting it off the ground. We use the same phrase, the valley of death, getting from 1 to 10 people, where you employ people and your revenue just crashes. I think at 10 it changes, because you're 1 to 10, you're saying, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Business plan, no marketing. Yes, it works. It's worse. I'm employing someone, I'm sacking someone.
Yeah.
Then 10 to 25, you go through this 15 number. So you go at about 15, you employ your first non-fee earner, and that is a huge thing going on.
Yeah.
And that's a huge shock, because it's like, so we're employing someone for 50,000, we're only making 20% profit. So they need to generate 5 times their 50,000 just to wash their face. That's the problem. And then at about 25 people, the team starts kicking in, and the owner starts handing stuff over, and it starts to be a management team. So the conversations with sub 10 people are very much what to do. Conversations 10 to 30 are very much not what you need to do, but how do you actually implement it. So it's, I know I need a marketing plan, but how on earth do I do one that works? I've tried it 3 times, everyone's pants. And then kind of post 30, we're starting to talk about joint ventures, exit deals. How do I run the board? How do I make the board more effective?
That's interesting.
Because as the owner hopefully goes from being agency owner through to business owner.
That's fascinating. That's crazy. The metrics that the headcount numbers that you use, because 10 people is a $2 million Australian ideally benchmark. So that's that smaller fish. And then you said 15 where you hire that first fee earner, which is a 3 million Aussie business, and that then builds out. And then I guess if I push that up to a 20, that becomes that 4 million, which is probably what, 3.5 mil pound is where it really starts to breathe again. And you've got the margin to be able to think about those bigger problems.
Well, you need the margin to solve those problems. We've run out of time. Final question. I will ask you two questions, actually. First one is, what are the 2 or 3 metrics that everyone has to be all over and on top of all the time without no apologies? You need to look at these numbers. And the second thing, which may be the same as the first thing, is what's the one big thing you want people to take away from this conversation? What's the one thing you wish you could tattoo on every agency owner's forehead?
Yeah. So I'll do the second one first.
Sure.
That one is the insights from the report is if you're tracking time, make sure your team aren't lying to you and focus on the boring stuff. Have a system to spot over servicing and out of scope work. Track where your team's time is going, because that is going to become a problem if you don't do it where you're at right now. So that was the biggest insight, is focus on the boring stuff. That stuff matters, and that will give you more cash in your bank forever. So it's boring, but it's worth it. In terms of the metrics, I mean, the classic ones I'm always looking at is your staff costs as a % of revenue. For me, that tells me everything, and that's that's the number one thing to have in balance for an agency. And then obviously I actually look at operating profit a lot more often, because that strips away all of the EBITDA nonsense that you mentioned about other tax adjustments, FX, ins and outs, all kind of skullduggery that's not affecting the engine room. I put that under. So I look at operating profit more than net, because I want to see what the true business model is doing. So that would be the other one. And then cash runway. For me, a CFO, it'd be remiss for me not to talk about cash. If you run out of cash, it's game over for the business. So making sure people have enough cash runway in 2 to 3 months, ideally, to get us through the tough times, which everyone has experienced through COVID. If you're an agency owner still in the game, you felt it in COVID.
Too right. Michael Watt from Sydney. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating how similar, but also it's been fascinating to get your insight into how you as a CFO look at a business and how you help an agency be even better. Thank you so much. Links and things will be at the bottom. And it just goes to me to say thank you, Michael, for being an absolutely brilliant guest. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.